Welcome to the Citation podcast. I'm Adrian Brine, Partnerships Manager here at Citation, and today we're talking about inspections and compliance visits. Because whilst funeral homes are used to being inspected, what's changed is the range of inspections and the level of scrutiny. For funeral teams, the day-to-day is demanding, caring for the deceased, supporting families, coordinating services, and keeping facilities running smoothly. So when an inspection comes with new expectations, more documentation, clearer processes, and providing evidence on the spot, it can feel like one more thing to manage on top of an already pressurised workload. I'm joined by two guests offering insights and guidance from differing backgrounds. Firstly, I have Andrew Judd, Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Funeral Directors, bringing the voice of the sector, and Mike Foulds, one of our own health and safety experts at Citation, who works closely with funeral businesses across the UK. So, to set the scene, funeral businesses across the UK can be visited by different bodies depending upon where they are and what they do. Even though the inspectorate can vary, the same pressure points come up time and time again, such as care of the deceased, COSH, infection control, manual handling, workplace hygiene and PPE, fire safety, and the maintenance of equipment and facilities. So, Andrew, if I can start with yourself, please. Look, we all know that in recent years, the landscape of inspections in the funeral sector has changed dramatically. So what should funeral teams be thinking about now in terms of what should they be focusing upon in terms of inspections?
You're right. Over recent years, the focus of the unseen aspects of the funeral director's work have very much been under the spotlight. And if you think about the back of house areas in funeral businesses, that's ultimately where the greatest risks occur.
Okay.
Members of the NAFD have always been subject to, detailed inspections, both front of house and back of house. But the dial has definitely been turned up in terms of the safety of those working in the back of house areas, and also the safeguarding of the deceased people that are cared for and stored in those areas. Yes. So there is a big focus on mortuaries, on holding facilities, and particularly the equipment that is used, whether that is refrigeration units and the ambient temperatures that they operate at. Also, the equipment that funeral directors have to use and increasingly have to use to help the dignified and the safe movement of deceased people. So we have hoists, we have trolleys, we have lots of things in our back of house areas that need to be properly understood as to how they're used, how to be used safely, and also that there are maintenance regimes in place, whether that's lifting equipment under the LOLA regulations,
Yes.
whether that's ventilation and the science behind the frequency that air is changed. The spotlight is very much on making sure that that environment protects everybody. And our inspectors follow the code of conduct. We worked with the Scottish Government. So this, on the 5th of March last year, that code for funeral directors became law in Scotland. At the moment, the Scottish Government are not inspecting funeral directors against it, but we have adapted our code to incorporate the Scottish code. So we are still inspecting all our members in Scotland and around the rest of the United Kingdom. But the stories that have unfolded in the media about funeral directors who elect to operate their business outside the scrutiny of a trade association have focused very much on what the general public think happens versus, sadly, at times, what actually does
I
happen.
see.
Our members are very receptive to visits from our standards and quality managers. And refreshingly and very encouragingly, what we have seen is members very proud and pleased when they've been inspected and they've met or exceeded the standards required of them. When the situation arose in Hull with legacy independent funeral directors, NAFD and SAFE worked very closely with the government of the day to explore who else could have eyes on the areas of funeral directors that perhaps wouldn't normally be seen or inspected. And there was a temporary arrangement with local authority environmental health officers to start visiting funeral homes in the same way that they visit food outlets, tattoo parlors, and all the other aspects of our lives that are under scrutiny. That was a very interesting exercise because we worked with the ministers at the time to identify a way of sharing what good looks like. So both trade associations worked together, identified businesses that we both felt joint members that not only met the standards but went the extra mile to exceed them, so that environmental health officers who are not used to inspecting mortuaries were able to understand what to look for.
Yes.
And let's just remind ourselves, at the moment, whilst mortuary settings in NHS trusts and public mortuaries, coroners' mortuaries in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and procurator fiscal facilities in Scotland, they are regulated, and they come under, certainly in England and Wales, the Human Tissue Authority. But the horrific crimes of David Fuller that have been well reported on actually took place in a regulated setting, in an inspected mortuary by an electrician, as it happens. So funeral directors have nothing to fear with outside eyes coming into their business. And my understanding from members is they join the NAFD because they want to be the best they can be, and they're very receptive to being able to illustrate, not by what they say, but by what they do, that the things that are unseen are under the same level of scrutiny and oversight as the more traditional aspects of funeral directors' work that the public are more familiar with and do see.
Right.
So it's a very welcome spotlight. Unfortunately, in media terms, people will judge all funeral directors sometimes based on what is a very, very isolated number of very sad situations. And the fact that they're isolated doesn't make them any the less painful for those involved. But funeral directors have a duty of care to the living and the dead. And whether it's the living through the clients that they serve, or whether it's through the teams and the people that they employ, my experience is that funeral directors take that responsibility very seriously indeed. And, we talked earlier about the need to have a safe and a competent and a happy workforce, ensuring that the environment that funeral directors' teams working is right will help them to help other people.
Yep.
So if we help those working in the sector to work in the best environment that they can, under the safest policies and procedures, with the right guidance and scrutiny, then in doing so, they will care for the dead in the best way that they can, but also care for each other in doing so.
Great, thank you. It's interesting that I noted you say, funeral directors have nothing to fear from an inspection, and I'm going to come back to that a bit later on and explore some of the cultural side of things amongst the workforce. If I can turn to yourself, Mike, as one of our health and safety consultants who's out in the field literally every day, when you go into a funeral director's site or setting, what are just from a health and safety perspective, what are the common gaps that you're finding? What are they getting wrong or could be doing better?
I think it's an interesting point, actually. Visiting a variety of different premises, we come across a variety of different issues. Part of the problem is many of the funeral directors operate from very old premises, which comes with their own hazards, their own risks. Well, I think you picked up on a really good point a second ago. It's about that help. What we are, as health and safety consultants, are trying to do is help our clients get to a really good level of compliance. Now, unfortunately, some funeral directors don't actually know what true health and safety compliance is. And that's where we can offer some assistance and some pointers. So I think the big issues we often come across, a lot of health and safety issues are based around poor documentation. In the world of health and safety, if you've not got it written down, you've not done it.
Yes.
So, there's several parts when we talk documentation. If we're talking sort of mandatory testing and inspections, I have gone to sites where the electricity systems haven't been inspected at the regular frequencies. You picked up on the point about lower inspections for things like hoists. Again, a requirement, but through the own internal management, those tests haven't been done at the right frequencies. And again, that's where we can offer some help, some guidance in setting up some management systems. Another key area is that of risk assessments.
Okay.
You have to have risk assessments in place for any hazardous activity. And clearly within the funeral home environment, you've got issues such as, manual handling is certainly a big one. Infection control, you've got COSH as an issue as well. There are some fairly hazardous substances. And then we come out of the funeral home side of things. And if we're talking sort of within churchyards or crematorium areas, you've got members of staff who are working for the funeral directors who may only work on a part-time basis. And the problem with that is these guys, again, sometimes don't get the same message as the full-time folks. So that can impact on them having access to things like the risk assessments, maybe the standard operating procedure documents, certainly training. One thing I do find quite a lot of is a vast difference in the quality and standard of training to all members of staff, be it part-timers or full-timers. And I think one of the other areas is when we look at sort of the funeral home itself, it is split into two areas. You've got the front of house, which the general public come into. Often we find that is in really good order because that's a showroom, isn't it? So, things are in good order, neat, tidy, carpets are great, no trip hazards, etc. The minute you go out the back and you're in the engraving room or the room where the coffins are stored, again, that sometimes doesn't get that same level and standard of housekeeping, quality control. So as a sort of an independent, fresh set of eyes, we have the ability to go into a premises and pick up on all those good things, pick up on all the things that need some improvement. A phrase I use a lot with my clients is we are your safety friends. And we're working together in partnership to find anything that may not be wrong and help and guide you to put it right. I think that's the issues really. And then just the final point for me, and something that we always find issues with is COSH, either the storage of chemicals, the documentation when it comes to COSH assessments. And again, I know some funeral directors have externals come in who manage their COSH, some have them in-house, but it needs to be really, really hammered home and important that those areas are absolutely spot on. Because you're dealing with some really dangerous substances.
Excellent insight. Thank you. The second area I'd like to chat to you both about is this point about being fearful perhaps of inspections. So I guess if I start with yourself, Andrew, from your experience of talking to NAFD members, if you were chatting to a business and giving them some advice, how would they make their teams not fearful about inspections? Full stop. What sort of advice would you give to a business manager or someone that's operating funeral director?
Well, I think it's well established in the sector and in the majority of good funeral directors that operate in the sector that, integrity is about doing the right thing when nobody's watching you. And I think that's for me, it's a really strong culture point. And doing the right thing might be how you behave. Doing the right thing most definitely will be about how you fulfill your duties safely. And we've already covered the issue about equipment and safe use of that. But listen, in my time at NAFD, we have had situations where people have lost their lives because of health and safety matters.
Yes.
In the business, and that has to be avoided at all costs.
Yes.
And as absolutely, as you said, sometimes it's just awareness and assessing the risk.
Yep.
But there are some more basic things that sometimes people overlook until it happens to them, and that's often the case. The risk of fire in a funeral business has some perhaps some known consequences, but also unintended consequences. And we are doing a lot of work at the moment with funeral directors that have multiple sets of ashes in their care. That is a problem for the funeral directors. It's a problem for the sector. But it only takes a fire in a funeral director's business. It may be that the living are safely evacuated. It would absolutely, hopefully, be the case that any deceased could be safely moved to somewhere else. But inevitably, these cremated remains become victim to the fire, and they are lost.
Yes.
Now, prevention of fire and safe storage of cremated remains go hand in hand for me. And I think I would like funeral directors to think about the wider issues of the risk of fire to their business. It goes beyond the health and safety of the living. There is an impact and a risk to the dead. And I think if we open our minds a little bit, what can we do? What can we do to stop it happening in the first place? The other point about the areas of funeral businesses that are not so widely seen, we talk rightfully so about front of house. The use of spaces, the segregation of activities in front of house is usually pretty good. There are certain areas designated for certain purposes. That may be a chapel of rest for families to come and pay their last respects to the one that they've lost. It may be offices or arrangement rooms, and there may be administration, and there may be kitchens, and there'll be toilets. But it's very clear what happens in each part, each area.
Yes.
For historical reasons sometimes, and you're absolutely right, for an old building with a limited footprint, sometimes that segregation can become blurred. And one of the key components of the code that we operate to is to help funeral directors understand that if you have a specific area designated for a specific activity, then make sure that you don't blur the boundaries, and infection control and safeguarding of the deceased for modesty reasons, for reasons of dignity, care or compassion. It's really important that these special areas remain special areas.
Yes.
And for the activities that funeral directors carry out that do come with a higher risk, the preservation, the presentation of the dead, embalming, these activities have to be carried out in areas that mean that they're fit and proper for that purpose. So I think when you have the challenges of limited space, or you're expecting a lot of different things to happen in one particular area of the funeral business, then I think it's really important to keep the optics on what do we do where, and how do we make sure that we don't start doing something that's designated for one place in an area that actually perhaps is designated more for storage or general activities. And also making sure that the people that work in the business have somewhere safe where they can go, where they can relax, where they can have something to eat, have something to drink, that is away from the more intimate aspects of what funeral directors do.
Excellent advice. Thank you. Mike, over to you. Staying on the cultural area, as somebody that walks into funeral directors quite frequently, what sort of advice could you give to the business manager on how they get the workforce thinking about health and safety every day and all the time, rather than, dare I say it, the week before they know that Mike's going to come in from Citation?
I think that's an interesting question. One of the key areas around non-compliance that we find within the funeral home is the fact, picking up on your point about fire is a great one. No records of fire checks, etc. And I think part of the issue is getting more people involved in safety. Many of the sites I go to, the funeral director, the managing director, whoever has that sort of top slot, is trying to do everything themselves. And health and safety management is relatively complex if you don't get your head around it. And by sharing out some of those health and safety tasks, like weekly fire checks, inspections on your emergency lighting, visual inspections on your firefighting equipment, which are all quite important, especially when it comes to sort of fire reduction, and sort of general checks of the workplace. What we try and get the message across is make sure as a business you are doing regular checks of all your workplace areas. Get it documented. I mentioned documentation earlier. One of the main areas of failure in any business is lack of documented evidence. Now, I think from a cultural point of view, one of the areas which I think brings people together is good communication, good consultation with the teams. Now, again, that can be quite difficult because you may have part-time staff, you've got full-time staff, you may have staff who only work certain days of the week. So as a funeral director and the business, you've got to work out some sort of methodology for getting that message across. Be it meetings, be it your WhatsApp groups, be it memos, a combination of all can really help and get that message. Training, I think, is something that really gets forgotten, especially things like manual handling training. Probably one of the biggest risks, because in the current circumstances, I think people vary differently in size. So one day you may have a sort of a large casket to move, other days you may have a small casket to move, and that will take a different methodology for movement. Training, I think, has to be regular. And again, if you're doing regular training with staff, that builds the culture because people are used to talking safety. They're used to training. It's not just an ad hoc thing. Oh, we've got a health and safety inspection, better get the training up to date. Spread it across the year. All sorts of topics, fire safety, health and safety. Another thing is your cost management, train people on chemicals and management, etc. I think really sort of to end on that, the other thing is getting that information across culturally. So earlier I talked about risk assessments. Often we find risk assessments can be very good, can be very poor. Sometimes they sit in a dusty file on a shelf and we think we've ticked the box because I've got risk assessments, but they've not been shared with any member of staff, any employee. And again, that's how we can help, with risk assessment templates, good quality documentation, good training courses, getting that message out to people. It's not difficult if it's managed well. And we can help with that management.
Great, thank you. And then just my final topic then for both of you. Let's leave the listeners with some practical advice and tools again. We've talked about health and safety being something you do every single day of the year rather than just when the inspectors are coming along. But look, when they get notification that the inspector's coming, it does spark a bit of fear sometimes within the workforce. So the question is, when they are informed that they are about to be inspected by any sort of body, what advice would you give, and I'll start with you, Mike, what advice would you give to any business who has just been notified that they've got an inspection coming?
If they are concerned about what the inspection may entail, they can call us as a business, offer some practical advice. We have health and safety consultants available 24/7. So there is always someone who you can talk to if you're concerned about any issues that might come forward. On the back of that, one phrase I often use when I'm visiting clients is share the safety love. It's about getting your whole team involved. And if you're doing that and everyone's doing their bit, so your first aid boxes are checked, your fire book's up to date, when that inspection comes along, it's not a big issue because you know your compliance is in good order and there's not going to be any surprises.
Excellent.
And again, that builds on that culture I was talking about earlier.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. And then lastly to yourself, Andrew, same question. So one of the team in Solihull at NAFD get a call from a member to say, we're about to get an inspection. What would the advice to the member be?
The advice to the member would be to walk through their business and to identify any areas that they feel that they're concerned about and to prepare in advance to take advice from the health and safety inspector. As Mike said, in many respects, we're driving instructors. We want to get people through the exam. And advocacy and best practice, Mike will have learnt in other businesses solutions to problems that perhaps just seem beyond reach and sharing that best practice. But it's about being honest. If there's something in your business that you think might be a problem, but you're not sure, then make a note of it and have a sensible and honest discussion. It might be the staircase. It might be some headroom issue. It might be the fact that unavoidably there's a difference in levels that you have to negotiate all the time because you can't think of a solution for the movement of deceased. The other bit of advice that I absolutely would give, and having during my career looked at lots of reports of accidents and riddle reports, there's an awful lot that happens outside of the funeral director's premises. Mike mentioned about, this time of year, clambering around in slippery cemeteries and having the right footwear on to do that. Funeral directors want to look the part, but they've also got a very practical job to do, which is to carry the deceased to where they need to be. But I would also ask the owner-operators to think about the areas they operate in that perhaps won't be inspecting and some of the challenges that they have.
Very good point.
Because we are finding more and more that when we attend out of hours during the night, often the funeral directors are the first and now in many cases the only people on the scene. Sometimes we don't know what we're going to find when we get there.
Yes.
It may be somebody that's passed away in a difficult situation, and perhaps more people are needed to deal with that. And I think whilst funeral directors would like to be quietly efficient and to come and to go, sometimes it's better just to take a time out and assess the situation, and if need be, wait for extra help, because otherwise the consequence could be that someone gets injured or the respect of the deceased is compromised, and nobody wants that. So I would also encourage the members to think about some of the scenarios that they've witnessed, not on their own premises, but that their staff and as an employer, they're still responsible for. Because, when people die at home could be on the 27th floor of a tower block where the lift is out of action.
Yes.
So we just need to think about the practicalities that we can't avoid, but we should at least have principles that we follow to protect people. But honesty, pragmatism, and accepting that as an employer, you are legally responsible for those you employ, and to take that responsibility seriously, because ultimately the price could be very high to pay. Someone could get injured, your business could be financially liable, and that could endanger the successful continuation of your business, or in extremis, you could end up in jail.
Yes.
So health and safety is not something to pay lip service to. It's something that you have to discipline yourself to try and understand. And there are plenty of people with the knowledge, like Mike, and within Citation and other organizations, that will help you understand it. So you don't have to be a subject matter expert, but you have to respect the subject and make every effort to understand what role you play in it. So I think that's really important. And you have to make it a real living part of your business culture. There will be things in your business that everybody talks about every day.
Yes.
There will always be things. Find a way of making sure that somehow an important health and safety matter can be brought up, can be part of that culture. And if somebody comes up with a pragmatic solution that they think might make the environment safer, and that Mike might think would make the environment safer, then call that out. Call out the fact that somebody has come up with a solution to a problem that perhaps you couldn't, and recognize them for that, and celebrate the innovation that can exist within your team if they are enlightened and stimulated by the right expert advice. It's not going anywhere. And if you want to run a business, you have a duty of care to run it responsibly.
Thanks both. So to close, inspections can feel intimidating, and in many cases, they probably always will. But as we've discussed today, if you've got the right systems, a confident team culture, and preparations in place, inspections can become far more manageable and even a useful way to strengthen standards and safety. A huge thank you to my guests, Andrew Judd and Mike Foulds, for sharing their insight with us today. And to our listeners, if you're looking for help with health and safety, risk assessments, training, or ongoing compliance support for your funeral business, please head over to citation.co.uk. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.